Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have concerns or are seeking a diagnosis or treatment, please seek individual advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks associated with acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride.
Please drink responsibly and in moderation. Before drinking, please be sure to be of the legal drinking age for your country. We do not encourage the misuse of alcohol. Media Mixer, the podcast where we mix medicine, media, and a little pop culture into something that hopefully goes down a little smoother. Today's episode is a new format we're calling The Refill. These are episodes where we go back to one of our earlier deep dives, re-release it, and add updated context when something in medicine, media, or the world has shifted. Think about it as topping off your glass. Same drink, new information. And today's refill is episode number 15. Hold on, let me check that. Episode number 13, titled Brain on Fire and the MMR. Before we jump right back into that, we're going to add a quick update about what's happening right now with measles, because it directly affects a lot of what we talk about in that episode. A major measles outbreak is underway in upstate South Carolina, especially centered around Spartanburg and Greenville counties. The outbreak began in early October 2025 and has grown rapidly, driven primarily by spread in unvaccinated communities or undervaccinated communities. As of February 3, 2026, state health officials reported 876 confirmed measles cases in South Carolina, a significant surge since the outbreak's start. Hundreds of people quarantined or isolated due to exposure risk. Most infections have occurred among the unvaccinated. Fully vaccinated and partially vaccinated individuals make up a very small minority of cases. This makes the South Carolina outbreak one of the largest in the United States in recent history, surpassing totals seen in other states earlier this year. How it started and spread. South Carolina's Department of Public Health confirmed the upstate outbreak on October 2, 2025, after several linked cases were detected. Since then, initial reports showed that small clusters in Spartanburg County schools and households. By late December, case counts had climbed into the hundreds, with exposures in schools, churches, and homes. Many close contacts are quarantined. Cases continued to rise into January 2026 and beyond, with new infections reported on most weekly updates. Why it escalated. A few key factors are behind the rapid growth of the outbreak. Low vaccination coverage. South Carolina's MMR coverage among young children was estimated at about 88 to 92%, which is below the 95% threshold needed to prevent sustained measles spread. This means many children and adults lacked immunity before measles entered the community. Measles is extremely contagious, as we touch on in this episode, and an infected person can spread the virus before they show symptoms. The virus can remain in the air and on surfaces for hours after an infected person has left the area. Combined, low immunity and high contagion have allowed measles to spread efficiently in schools and households. The public health response. State and local health officials have been actively responding. Quarantines and isolation for exposed or infected individuals. Public exposure notifications, particularly in settings like schools or churches, and expanded outreach about MMR vaccination, including efforts to make vaccines available. However, health officials emphasize that vaccination remains the most effective tool to stop the outbreak. What it means. This outbreak is more than a regional event. It's a warning signal for the whole United States. Sustained transmission anywhere increases the risk of measles spreading into new areas, particularly where vaccination rates are low. As measles continues to circulate in South Carolina and other parts of the country, discussions about herd immunity, vaccination policy, and public health education are increasingly urgent. Now, on to the episode.
Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, clinical psychologist.
I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, back again on a weeknight.
We are. I almost said, I'm Dr. Peniston. I'm like, you people aren't going to know who I am. I'm not your doctor. Sorry. It's automatic sometimes.
I know.
Which took a very long time to get used to calling myself that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And it's what's interesting is because then my patients, they feel informal calling me Tara. I just introduce, I'm Tara, the physician assistant. And I could say PA Prisco, but like, I don't know.
Weird.
That it doesn't sound right to me. So.
My very first day, like working as like an official doctor, it was like an early morning patient. There was nobody in the office. I was there, and they like came in and they went out to the waiting room, and I was like, "Oh, hi, like, are you so and so?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, I didn't even think. I was like, "Dr. Peniston will be right with you," and I was like, "Oh God, that's me."
I spoke about myself in the third person.
And then I had to come back out. I'm like, "Come on back," and they're like, "Oh, and I was like, "Sorry, it's an off day."
Awkward.
I mean, it's awkward though, like calling yourself a title for the first time, especially.
Right. I can see that. Yeah.
It still sometimes weirds me out. I'm like, what? Okay, whatever. I'm ready.
All right. So my cocktail is the MMR, the Mango Mojito Refresher.
Not the measles, mumps, rubella?
Maybe.
That's what it stands for, right? Did I get it right?
Yes. So the recipe calls for making your own mint simple syrup. It's actually easier than cooking it on the stove, is to literally pour all those things in a little ramekin and put it in the microwave. So I did. It's 50. So simple syrup is always 50% sugar, 50% water, and then throw a few mint sprigs in there and microwave it for a couple of minutes until it blends, and there you go. You don't have to do it on the stove. Nice. So that's what I did. And then basically you take a fresh lime cut into small circles, 4 to 8 mint leaves. I say heavier on the mint, the better. 3 ounces of mango nectar or juice. I did find nectar, which I think it makes it a little bit better. It's a little more to it. And then 1.5 ounces of the simple syrup that you had made, 2 ounces of white or light rum. You could always leave that out. Crushed ice and club soda. So you start in the bottom with the limes and the simple syrup, muddle that a little, throw your mint leaves in, muddle that a little bit, and then you layer on the rum, the nectar, and then pour the ice. I'm sorry, first ice, then rum, nectar, and then pour your little soda over the top. I did have to mix mine because the mango kind of fell because it was heavier. Yeah, the nectar and it was all just rum at the top. So I did have to take a straw and mix it before because when I was drinking it, I was like, "Woof, that's a little too much."
Mix it.
But it was pretty, so I'll have to send you the picture. We can put that up with the recipes.
It sounded good when I was typing up the recipe for our socials. I was like, I need to try this.
Yeah, I mean, mango mojitos. I mean, you can't go wrong. Mojitos are nice. Yeah. I do like. So I am covering the TV show Outlander. Well, have you watched it?
Not all of it. I think I stopped at whatever season when the daughter's like, I'm going to go back.
Okay. All right. So this is,
numbers, but whatever season that was the last season I saw.
Okay. So what I'll tell you the listeners, a little bit about the show. But what I'm covering is episodes 405 and 406, which are in the 4th season. And
all they need to know about the show is Irish kilts and shirtless hot men. That's all they need to know.
Not Irish, Scottish. Sorry. Get it right.
Scottish kilts and shirtless hot men.
Seriously, I didn't know.
There's also time travel, but like, does it matter what time we're in?
Jamie Fraser. That's all I have to say.
I'm so sad. We almost got to meet the Outlander cast, but we had tickets for the wrong day of Comic-Con because they don't announce who's going until after you buy the tickets. So we didn't know, but.
Oh, no.
So close.
Seriously. I didn't know I had a thing for Scots until I met him.
You met him?
No, till I met him on screen. Um, so for those who don't know, Outlander is a historical drama TV series, but it's actually based on a book series by Diana Gabaldon. And I actually read the first 2-ish books, and then I started watching the series. And honestly, the series is so good that I feel like I didn't even need to read the books because the series
books as spicy as a series?
Yes.
Okay,
And it is fun. And maybe I'll go back. There's, I think there might be like 10 of them now.
yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. So, but it's just really well done. The series is really well done. So it premiered on Stars in 2014. And the main characters is the first is Claire, who's
well, for those of you who don't have Stars, I believe 4 seasons are on Netflix. Not all of
them.
them.
5 are on, maybe even 6. No, I think 6, because 7 is the last one, and that one's not there. But everything else, because I went back and I was like, oh, I didn't watch this last season, so I started watching it after I was inspired for the podcast to go back to it.
Yeah.
So Claire Randall, who is one of the main characters, played by Catriona Balfe. She's a World War II military nurse who's in Scotland in 1945. Actually, I believe she is on her honeymoon or a trip with her husband. I think just a trip with her husband. Mm-hmm. And she goes up to this area that's sort of Stonehenge looking. And somehow she is magically transported back to the year 1743.
It's not magic, it's fate.
It is.
Come on. He learned nothing.
I mean, it is for sure fate. The two of them, they were fated.
And her husband, he's part of it too. They're all connected.
Yeah. So she ends up meeting Jamie Fraser, who's played by Sam Hogan. I don't know how Heughan. I don't want to mispronounce it. But he is a very handsome Scotsman, and he's from the clan Fraser. And, basically, historically, this sort of follows real history. So it's pretty interesting because I didn't know too much about Scottish history and the Jacobite Rising. So, like I said, it's pretty interesting. So where we find ourselves, where I'm looking, is just after the Battle of Culloden, which is a big battle that happens in Scotland. And right after that, Claire actually returns to her own time because she knows the Battle of Culloden takes out many Scots, and she figures Jamie's going to end up dying and, let me go back. And she happens to be pregnant. So she goes back to her own time. 20 years later, and I'm not giving crazy spoilers because it's a great show. Watch it. 20 years later, when the daughter that she was pregnant with is Brianna, who's now, I guess, 20 years old, she decides, well, she's grown. She went back to her husband in real time, and he ends up dying in a car accident. And in the interim, she actually became a physician. So she was a nurse before she went. She becomes a physician and actually a surgeon. And so she decides, I'm going back. She found in a book that Jamie's still alive, and she's like, I need to go back. So she ends up going back. And so she returns somewhere in the 1760s and meets back up with Jamie, and things happen. So I'm not going to give you every little detail, but essentially where we are is now they've gone from Scotland, and now they're in the Americas. And so this is pre-Revolutionary War, right around that time. The Brits are still heavily involved. And Jamie had been working himself through the politics of Europe over the past however many years, and he ends up being given 10,000 acres of land to develop, and he calls it Fraser's Ridge. So they're building a home. This is located in North Carolina. They seem to be very friendly with the Native Americans, him and Claire. And in the beginning of this episode, 405 and 406, I'm looking at the beginning of episode 405, you see Claire learning from one of the Native American healers. And then you see her helping a German family with their daughter who just had a baby. You see the German father, come back, and he gives this doll, he picked up on the road, wherever, from a vendor for the baby. And they named the baby Clara after Claire because she helped deliver the baby when they were in need. While she's at the house helping this family, tensions raise when some Native Americans come and drink from the creek right outside their home. And basically it ends up with sort of a standoff of the German father coming out with his gun and threatening them, and the Native Americans raising their guns and threatening, and Claire staying in the middle because she's friends with everybody and just understands that they're just people. But at that time, they thought Native Americans were savages, right? That's what they called them. And so she kind of diffuses the situation, and she goes back to her cabin. Her work is done with helping the baby. And she's alone for a few nights because Jamie had to go into town to do a couple of things. Then one day, the pastor of this area comes to warn her that the German girl and the baby died of measles, and that the father blames her. And he thinks it's because she let the, quote, Indians, Native Americans, curse their water. So, of course, Claire is worried that this German guy is going to come after her. She's alone in this cabin in the middle of the woods in North Carolina. So you see her like sleeping in her rocking chair with a gun, all of these things. Eventually he does come, and he says, I came to see if you're okay, if you caught the measles, and they died. And he said they died so quick. He said the curse was strong. And he said, my wife and I didn't get it because we had measles back in Germany, and we were only sick for a week, though. We didn't die. And you see him pull out this something wrapped in a towel. It's the same towel that he brought the baby's doll wrapped in. So Claire thinks, he's going to give me the doll, from the baby that was named after me. And when she opens it up, it's the scalp of the healer woman who she was working with in the first episode, the Native American healer.
I mean, I know it was like a thing that happened, but doesn't it feel like a little racist that the Indian guy scalped somebody?
Well, no, the German guy scalped the Indian.
Oh, I thought you were saying the other way around.
No, so he killed the healer, the Native American healer, in retaliation, essentially.
Oh, for
because they cursed the water and killed,
the hymns confused.
Yes, German man. Yeah. So he leaves, Claire's shocked. He leaves to go home. And
what did she do with the scalp?
She actually did like this little ceremony and put it in the fire to burn it because that was her friend, and like sent her spirit off. So we see German guy go back to his house, and we see the Native Americans then setting his house on fire with flaming arrows, and his wife coming out of the house with an flaming arrow through her and dying.
I'm sorry, I have this weird face for if this ever becomes a clip, because I'm trying to track in my head if measles can be passed on through the cloth that it was wrapped in. But then I'm like, no, that's smallpox. But like, I don't know if they're similar.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with that. So, yeah. So basically the German guy comes home to see his wife dying, all the retaliation, all the tension between the Native Americans and the others. And so it's just kind of sad because it shows that Claire, remember, she came from our time. She understands germ theory. She understands what this is. And she's trying to explain it. And she's desperate to keep like everything calm between these people. And it's pretty sad, Mm-hmm. So basically at the end of that episode, Jamie comes home and she kind of falls into his arms. But essentially in town, there's been a measles outbreak. That's where this came from. This came from people. It always comes from people. So we never, during that episode, got to see the daughter, Petronella, and her baby with the measles. We didn't get to see what that looked like, what the disease looked like. But in the next episode, some more things happen, so we're able to see a little bit more of what it looks like. So Lord John Grey, who's someone Jamie knows from his past, very complicated, not going to go into that. Very, very complicated.
It gets very messy with him.
He is in and out of Jamie's life. Well, we're just going to say for a long time. He comes
not always in a good way.
Spoiler
alert.
And he comes up to their cabin and, great to see you, and, whatever, to see Jamie and Claire and Murtaugh, who I didn't tell you about, but they're out in the woods and they happen to see a boy sitting on a rock and yelling, "Help, help, help." And the boy has leeches on him. "I want my father." And, Claire's like, the leeches will fall off. You'll be fine. But the boy's like very uppity, dressed in
wine, and they're just leeches.
Right. He's dressed to the nines. He looked like he's never been, out in the woods and whatever. So essentially, this is Lord John Grey's son, who we know other things about, but I'm not going to tell you anything else about that because it's a big spoiler. But anyway.
I definitely remember that part of it.
Yes. So Jamie invites them, stay with us, and we'll catch up on everything. And Lord John mentions that his wife, his son's mother, passed away and that he and his son are here in the Americas now. So they again speak about how there is a measles outbreak in the town. And right before the end of Lord Grey's stay, the day he's about to leave, he starts to have a fever. So the first thing Claire does is she checks his mouth, which I'm going to, tell you now, and I'll tell you later during the medical part, but there's a very specific thing to see in the mouth with measles. It's called Koplik spots. And those are essentially, we say, pathognomonic for measles. There's nothing else that looks like that. So she's like, well, he's got measles. So he starts coughing, he has a headache. So they make, the decision to have Jamie take the son, Willie, the son, out in the woods for a few days, go camping, go hunting, go fishing, toughen the boy up a little bit so he doesn't catch the measles. We know that Claire had the vaccine because she came from the 70s back. So she had the vaccine, and Jamie had measles as a child. So neither of them are concerned about getting it. So Claire stays with Lord John to help take care of him. And you see him go through all the stages of the illness. So it's actually a very good depiction of it. It shows him burning up. She's giving him willow bark tea for the fever, severe headache, the rash. You just kind of see this sort of montage of him going through all the stages. And then eventually see him recover, and Willie and Jamie return. And then they end up, leaving and going on their way. But it was interesting, it was nice to see of the time, that we were able to understand the political climate, right? And the understanding between the Native Americans and those little tensions there. And then also to see a really great depiction of actually what measles looks like. So they did a good job with that. And it's that interesting perspective of Claire coming from a time where she knows everything about this. She's a physician, coming back to a time where people knew very little about it, and her trying to help people with the knowledge that she has.
Well, that comes up a lot of times throughout the show, as she's always trying to prevent catastrophes with this future knowledge, and most of the time people ignore her, or briefly she's called a witch. That's one of my favorite episodes.
Yes.
I love Gillis. But
Yes. So measles is very topical of the time. What's interesting is I had this on my list literally for the show months and months ago. We are today, February 27th is today. Yes. And there's been a lot of talk about measles because there's currently a decent sized outbreak in Texas, West Texas right now. And I'll go through statistics at one point, but the biggest thing that we found out yesterday, this was the first death from this outbreak of a child from measles, and is the first measles death in 10 years in the United States. So, that's pretty profound. Yes, we may have upcroppings of infection because this one has gotten so large so quickly. We've already had one death. Okay, so measles is very highly contagious. We did talk about this a little bit in episode 1. Remember when we talked about flu, we said the R naught of, say, flu is, I don't remember what it was, but it was like 1 to 2. Yeah. So one person infects 1 to 2 other people. Measles infects somewhere around 18 other people per one. That's 18 susceptible people, so they can be unvaccinated, too young to be vaccinated, or their vaccine immunity wore off. But it's a lot. One person can infect 18 people. It is, I believe it is the most infectious disease we have. And it is really transmitted the typical ways: infectious droplets, airborne spread with coughing and sneezing. And it can remain in the air for up to 2 hours after the person leaves the area. So it's just hanging there in the air waiting to get you. The onset usually is fairly delayed as well. So that's what's even more tricky with then tracking it, because you typically are exposed and then it's 7 to 14 days before you start with symptoms after exposure. So tracking back and contact tracing what somebody did 2 weeks ago and then who was contagious when is very tricky. And that's how this spreads like wildfire, because you're just living your life for the 2 weeks until you have symptoms, and you become contagious before you even have symptoms.
Right.
So typically, like flu-like things, you do often present with a high fever, and it actually can be above 104. So that's significant.
Yeah.
And the fever lasts 4 to 7 days. The prodromal phase is usually malaise, so fatigue, anorexia, so lack of appetite. And the thing that we learn in school, because we have, for your boards, there's the 3 C's. So conjunctivitis, cough, and coryza.
I only know what 2 of those are.
Yeah, so we know what conjunctivitis is. Cough, we know what that is. Coryza is just like a runny nose. I don't know why you don't use the word coryza in anything except for measles. I'm not sure. They just made it up to make a C. I'm not really sure. I've literally never used that except for a test question for measles.
Good to know. Now I can pass that question.
Other things you may have, so photophobia, lights bother you, swelling around your eyes, muscle aches. And then we talked about those Koplik spots. So they're bluish gray specks. They look like grains of sand on a red base on we call your buccal mucosa, opposite of your second molar. So that's if I took my mouth and I pulled it open and I looked on that sort of skin touching up to my molars, you're going to have these grayish specks there. It's very specific. Yeah. And you don't see it with anything else. It's not in your throat. It's not in your tongue. It's very specific. And that starts about 1 to 2 days before the rash, and they stay for about 3 to 5 days. You throwing things over there? What are you doing?
I moved my foot and I knocked over my shredder. Sorry.
It's okay. So the rash usually develops 14 days after exposure, so fairly early on in the disease. You can have mild itching, but it's not like chickenpox where you remember us all scratching like crazy. And you describe the rash as blanching. So when you're describing a rash, there's a lot of words.
I thought you said you described the ranch, and I was like, ranch dressing? I'm confused.
Sorry. Sometimes I realize that I do stumble over my words, and I apologize to everybody. My brain is ahead of my mouth.
I apologize for pointing it out. It just distracted me. I was like, huh?
So when we describe any kind of a rash, you have to use very specific terms. Nowadays, we can take a digital picture, I guess, and put it in the chart. But for all of millennia, you had to write these things on paper and hope the next person could read it and understand what you were speaking about. Mm-hmm. So when you're describing a rash, it's blanching this rash, which means the red, if you push on it with your finger, turns white and then turns back to pink. Mm-hmm. Erythematous, which is a fancy word for red. Macules, which are usually flat lesions. And papules, so if you think palpate, I can touch them. Papules, which are raised. They start on the face and they basically work their way down. And within 48 hours, they sort of what we call coalesce. So it's not like you're seeing discrete spots in that. It's just sort of everywhere, all over, touching each other, these patches that sort of are all connected. And it even includes your palms and soles. And when it does resolve, it also resolves the same way it came on, from the head down. And the most lesions you're going to see is usually above the shoulder. So chest, shoulders, like head is where everything's sort of just red. Sometimes you'll get bruising, or we call petechiae, which are little tiny blood blisters, if you want to think about it that way. Mm-hmm. And again, like we said, it lasts for 5-7 days, and then it sort of starts to resolve, and it can leave like these coppery brown, we call hyperpigmented, so more pigment patches, which then we call desquamate, which means skin peels. Uncomplicated measles, total can be about 10 days, and then the cough can linger a little bit. There are other things called modified measles and atypical measles, which are slightly different. Atypical is specifically people who were vaccinated with the original killed virus. So we'll go into the vaccines, but there was a period from 1963 to 1967 where the first vaccine they developed was a killed virus. It's a little bit less ineffective. So these people can get sort of a milder form of it, but they're not completely protected. Diagnosis nowadays, I mean, yes, clinical, but I would, of course, want to confirm that. So you can do blood work, and you may hear this in future things. When we check in blood work for immunity to certain things. We check things called IgM and IgG. So IgG is immunoglobulin. IgM is a different kind of immunoglobulin. So IgM is acute infection. IgG is resolved infection that you're now immune to, or you had a vaccine and you're immune to it. You can also do a swab for PCR, which I assume some lab somewhere can test that. I haven't looked up in like LabCorp and Quest in the major labs, but I assume somewhere in their book it says you can send a PCR for measles. So globally, measles is still a leading cause of death in young children. But of course, in this country, we've done pretty well with it, and it was for a moment eradicated in the year 2000. That was fairly short lasting, but it was eradicated. In the U.S., we do have outbreaks, but this Texas one is definitely bigger than ones we've had in the past. So as far as complications, this is where it gets a little tricky. So you can have that, we all had chickenpox and, everyone survived, but not everyone does with these, and we forget that. Yeah. So there are some major complications that can happen. And, the sort of biggest one, which is very interesting, is that we can develop sort of an immune amnesia. So
I'm listening. Go on.
Yeah. So measles can actually wipe out your immunity to other common things that you've developed immunity to. So other viruses you've had, other vaccines you've had, you've literally end up at the other end of it like a newborn baby with no immunity to any of this.
Wow.
And it can take 2 to 3 years to build that back up. So
would that ever be a good thing? Like, is there any way we could harness that ability to, like, somehow in science make that help in other ways, like learn to be immune to cancer or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. Because of the type of immune cells that it goes after, it's these memory. Let me get to where that is. Specific type. I think it's memory B cells, but let me see. Measles, immune suppression, immune amnesia. Yeah, old memory cells if it's host with new MV specific lymphocytes. So it targets a very specific type of immune memory cell. So I don't think that's going to go for other things. Mm-hmm. It's more like infectious things. And then, other big complications, actually encephalitis, which is one of the things that you obviously spoke about. This would be a viral encephalitis. Mm-hmm. Different kinds of pneumonia, because now your immune system's wiped out. So now you're susceptible to a bacterial pneumonia. You can have, if you carried latent tuberculosis, so you were exposed but didn't have it, it could become activated. So it's kind of scary in that end of things. There are the multitude of complication list is huge. I'm not going to read through all these crazy things that can happen, but it's not just a very simple illness. And 1 out of every 1,000 develops acute encephalitis, and it can be fatal in about 10% of them, and it can cause permanent brain damage. Wow. So, it's fairly scary. There are other things, a degenerative disease of the central nervous system called SSPE, and that is behavioral and intellectual deterioration and seizure. Mm-hmm. And that can not show up for like 10 years after you had it.
Wow.
Yeah. Treatment wise, like most viruses, it is mostly supportive treatment. So making sure you're hydrated, make sure you're breathing okay. They did discover that there are very specific doses of vitamin A that can be used once you have it to help reduce the risk. And if you are exposed to measles, there are post-exposure prophylaxis, kind of like we talked about with rabies. So there are things you can do. So you were contacted that you were in contact with somebody a few days ago. I believe it's within 3 days. Yeah, within 3 days of exposure. If you aren't sure your vaccine status, or you aren't sure if you're fully immune, you can get a measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. And it's not going to hurt you to get an extra vaccine, even if you've already had it. Mm-hmm. So typically you err on that side of caution and you give it. The thing about the MMR vaccine is it is a live vaccine. So it has live virus in there. So there are a percentage of people who cannot have a live vaccine. So if they have undergoing chemotherapy, if they have certain cancers that affect the bone marrow, like leukemia and lymphoma, if they are on medications that are immunosuppressants. Now, we don't realize how actually pervasive not how pervasive, but how much we use immunosuppressants now.
Mm-hmm.
You see all those commercials every time you watch TV for psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease,
That's
all
one
of these
the things
things.
I say at the end. Do not take if.
Right. So those are immunosuppressants because they're trying to treat the autoimmune disease. Those people cannot have live vaccines because they are at risk of then getting the infection, not being protected by it. So this isn't just, those few people who can't have it, right? There's a lot of people who can't have it. So in patients who cannot get a vaccine, pregnant women, children under 6 months, and those immunocompromised people, you can give a measles human IgG or immunoglobulin. So that can be given. Again, I'm not sure how you'd access it. Hopefully your state has a stockpile somewhere. I don't think they keep that in the hospitals regularly, but that's something that could be given. So, I mean, there are things we can do, but it's still pretty scary. And, we look back about this vaccine and how we created it, when it came about. It's fairly interesting. So they use this same strain of measles that they collected back in 1954 from a boarding school outside of Boston who had an outbreak, and they used that to collect specimens.
Did they get permission? Because we know what happened with Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah, true. I do not know. But they collected it from this boarding school. Oh, actually, they have a name, so I don't know. It's an 11-year-old schoolboy, David Edmonston. So whoever he is.
Did he survive?
They don't tell me. I assume he did okay. I don't know.
I assume he did okay. I assume that for everyone. I assume everyone's doing okay.
Yeah, but this Thomas Peebles, the doctor, obtained the virus culture, and then working with his boss, John Franklin Enders, who's the father of modern vaccines, they developed the measles from the Edmonston, after the kid, Edmonston B strain. And so they tested this measles vaccine on some groups of children in New York and in Nigeria. I'm not sure why they had to go to Nigeria to test it, but there's probably some...
Maybe they're both have high populations.
Yeah, I don't know. But in 1961, it was hailed as effective, and they put it out for public use in 1963. And, the World Health Organization, of course, started to push for that, getting it out worldwide. And then they created the improved version in 1968, where they actually were able to do a live vaccine, but put it through a chick embryo 40 times and cause it to be less side effects.
So this many is questions about that. So many questions.
Chick embryos, yeah. So this is called
40 times. Why not 32?
Well, that's called science and experimentation. So I bet they tried it one time, and I bet they tried it 100 times, and all of the times in between. And this one was not too small and not too much. It's like Goldilocks, right?
Goldilocks effect. Thank you. I'm going to use that from now on when someone asks me why something. It's science.
So, they ran all the experiments. So that's called the Edmondson Ender strain, and basically is still used today. And then in 1971, they combined it with mumps and rubella. And then in 2005, they actually added chickenpox varicella onto it. So, there's kind of, if you go between the world and the U.S., the timelines are slightly different. So I'll stick to the U.S. timeline because it's a little more streamlined. In 1978, the CDC set a goal to eliminate measles by 1982. The goal was not met, but it did drastically reduce the disease rate. So by 1981, the number of reported measles cases was 80% less than the previous year. It did have a bit of an increase again in 1989. And at that time, they decided to add a second dose of the MMR to the vaccine schedule. So, fun fact, we probably only got one shot
Okay.
because we were like 10 years old. We're 10 years old then. I don't know. I'd have to find some records. I've had titers because school, you have to.
Yeah, I've had them too.
And I've had extra vaccines because I wasn't immune to rubella. So I've had that again. So I've gotten the MMR now an extra 2 times. So and I've had titers, so I should be good. But yeah, so I was actually just doing somebody's paperwork the other day for admission to medical school, but they were our age, going like a little younger than us, but going back, and they only had one. I'm like, oh yeah, I just read about that, how there's only one vaccine back then. So now they give 2. And so in 2000, the US declared that measles was eliminated. And that was defined by the absence of continuous spread for 12 months. There was, of course, a minor setback shortly after that, due to, I'm not even going to say his name, but a gentleman who's not a gentleman who wrote falsely a paper, and he published it in the Lancet asserting that the MMR vaccine caused autism. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that became pervasive throughout culture.
A full episode on all of that.
Became pervasive and scared a lot of people. And I understand people being scared because they just read that this doctor, the scientific paper that was published, said it.
Well, the crazy thing to me is that doctor was then forced eventually to write a retraction and say that he lied, and people still believe it's true. That drives me insane.
That's the tough part. That's the really tricky part. So that did reduce vaccination rates. Things went back up. And eventually he was not till 2010 though, he was, charged with misconduct and formally retracted and all of that. The thing about measles is because it's so highly infectious, we really need at least 95% vaccination or immunity among the population to prevent epidemics. Mm-hmm. So that's a really high number to achieve. And so that's why we see in pockets where that vaccination rate is lower, and this can kind of sneak around and start spreading. And that's what we talk about when we talk about herd immunity, right? So we need the herd to be protected, to have a high vaccination rate to protect those vulnerable people who cannot be vaccinated or are too young to be vaccinated. So, we're kind of sort of, like I said, going backwards. Hopefully this Texas one wakes everyone up and gets scared, and everyone who's not vaccinated. I hope you get it. I understand there's a lot of information out there. Trust your medical providers. Talk to them. Trust the World Health Organization, the CDC. No one's out here trying to hurt anyone. We just want a healthy population. We don't want people dying. We don't want kids dying. Right now, 2 doses of the measles vaccine is 97% effective at preventing measles. 1 dose is 93% effective. So even 1 is better than nothing. So again, it's just about let's do our best to help prevent this. I'm going to give you some quick stats that are updated as of yesterday on this current Texas outbreak, which will be a month old by the time this airs.
You're putting me to shame with these stats from last week or from today.
Well, no, I'm going to shout out to one of my really great resources is your local epidemiologist. She came out during, her name is Caitlin Jetlina, and she is is an epidemiologist, and she became very big during COVID and providing a lot of really great information. I subscribed to her emails.
Yeah, I remember you used to share her stuff a lot during COVID.
Yeah. So now I primarily follow her emails. So she put out some really good information yesterday. So, things we already talked about, this outbreak was kind of expected because we know that area does have low vaccination and we know how infectious measles is. We talked a little bit about how measles is not just a rash. Pneumonia is often a cause of death. And like we talked about, that immune amnesia. And it is unusual. There were comments recently by our health secretary who said this is no big deal. It is unusual because there's not been a death in the past 10 years. And we are only a few months, less than 2 months into the new year. and we're already hitting the amount of more cases than we've had in the past 10 years. So we have to look at it that way. So, we've had 4 outbreaks with more than 100 cases in the past 10 years. We are already up to, I think, 122, believe, on this outbreak. There are patients hospitalized in this outbreak. Again, there was a false statement saying that they're being hospitalized for quarantine. That is not true. They're being hospitalized for medical issues related to it, whether it be encephalitis, trouble breathing. We said the one death, and it's not too late. If you live in this area, please get vaccinated. It's very tough because it comes like a big wave, like a big tidal wave, and we just don't know how far it's going to go. I guess hopefully it stops when it reaches more geographically, at least reaches more highly vaccinated areas. But we live as we learned from COVID, we live in a world where you can get on a plane and travel anywhere. Right. So anything can spread very, very quickly. Just a couple things that she clarified also in her emails. The epidemiologist, this is not a vaccine derived strain. They've proven that because it is a D8 genotype. So it is not. And she said you can check your township's vaccination rates in schools if you have concerns. So that information is out there. And they're talking about, like we talked about briefly, if you're born before 1957, you're assumed to have had the virus. If you're born between 1957 and 1968, you may have had that lesser vaccine that was the killed vaccine. So they are saying you can go get another dose. You don't need to wait to check titers for that. And again, like it's not too late. Follow good sources. So your local epidemiologist is a great one. I would also say Unbiased Science, which they're a podcast, but they also have emails as well and social media posts. And Dr. Andrea Love, who also, she does a website called Immunologic, and she also does emails that are updated. So these are all scientists whose job it is to help inform us. They aren't medical physicians. They are statistics and lab driven and people who actually know how experiments are run. So they really can break down that information from papers really well. So I use them as a great resource for myself.
Nice.
That was a lot of talking.
It was a lot of talking. It was a lot.
So, it's interesting that we're still dealing with diseases that we had back in the 1760s. So,
and I mean, I'm going to be 100% honest. For about 20 minutes, I was just staring at a picture of Sam Hugan, and I was like,
oh, so seriously, he is.
I'll have to go back and re-listen for the stuff I missed. Sorry, I got a little distracted by a pretty man.
All right, so thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer,
the perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Medical Media Mixer podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps others find the show. Want to keep the conversation going? Follow us on social media. We're at Medical Media Mixer Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and on Pinterest, the Medical Media Mixer board.
If you'd like to support the show and help us grow, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Medical Media Mixer Podcast. And on Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Medical Media Mixer Podcast. If you have a topic idea, feedback, or just want to say hi, send us an email at medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. You can also stream all of our episodes and find more info on our website, medicalmediamixer.podbean.com. We're available on all major podcast platforms, so no matter where you listen, we're there. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep mixing medicine and media.